Hello, family. Welcome back to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I am your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So we are going to be hitting Gaza today. Let's never stop talking about Gaza and never stop talking about Palestine. Some updates on Trump's actual plan to see through mass deportation, right? And then I want us to get back into examining the fight tape. We're making a very good headway. Let's jump into this migrant stuff right away because things are wild. Like I get up and I do all the research and, get the whole thing together and figure out everything that's happening in the news and in the culture so I could come here and talk about it with y'all. And when I tell you, I'm so sick and tired of learning that another person has died from E. coli, right? And this time it's organic carrots. Corporate deregulation has been one of the most ridiculous, undignified things. Nope, death by carrot. Nigga, come on. Cantaloupe, quarter pounders, this is not acceptable. And I can't wait till we get to a point where the elites, like the corporate elite, is very clear and that we have a government that actually stands against corporate interests and for the people. I can't wait till we get to a point where that is the truth. That would be awesome. Anyway, something else though. I did read a story today about a dog, and the dog is okay, so don't worry, don't stress. But it's supposed to be somewhere here in the States, and the dog accidentally got sent to Saudi Arabia, right? I'm like, can you imagine this poor little baby? This little dog left with a woof and comes back with a mashallah, It's a Muslim dog in some white bread family in middle America. That would be amazing. Anyway, this is where we're at. We've talked about the fact that Trump has these awful cabinet choices, and he's made these wild campaign promises about deporting millions of people a year. And a lot of it could be hullabaloo, but it could also be very real, right? And my job and our job is to pay attention to when it stops being yap and it starts actually turning into a plan and it starts to actualize. And we are entering that period, and it's something that we absolutely need to pay attention to. So, because here's the thing. My thing was, you talk about the fact that you want to deport at least 15 to 20 million people, right? That are in the U.S. illegally. These are not verified numbers. This is what Donald Trump said. My job is to look at what actually makes that not possible, right? Outside of the fact that the numbers might not be there. So one of the serious impediments to this, and why I say we have to look and see, is that the cost would be extraordinary, right? That's according to the American Immigration Council, deporting 1 million people a year would cost over a decade, like $960 billion. That's a lot of money. And you might recall Homan, who is going to be this immigration czar, when he was challenged on this $80 billion a year commitment, he was just like, well, what's national security worth to you? And there's no real data that substantiates the fact that migrants are some national security concern. A more urgent threat is disinformation, right? When you have Russia, Iran, like these places that are actively sowing discord and dissent politically in America, like we don't already have enough of that, right? Where, orders from the Kremlin to these like bot farms will send out pro-Kamala shit and then also send out pro-Trump shit. And it's all to incite, discord and hatred. And they use, our identities as to manipulate us. And at this current moment, we're very easily manipulated by that. So that's an actual security threat. There's no real data to substantiate the fact that, similar to voter fraud, nothing there. But we are not in a facts era anymore. We're in a whatever conspiracy confirms what I already believe or what I want to believe. That's what I'm going to go with. That's the era that we're in. But anyway, one of the major obstacles to this outside of the extraordinary cost, right? Because they could figure that part out. That I don't doubt. Is where you're going to put them. Where, like all these migrants that you say you're going to hold, where you're going to put them. And that was a concern because as it stands, ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they're already slammed wall to wall, right, with people in holding areas, and this was a huge issue that happened during Trump's first campaign, first run as president. And actually, we were able to see him shift because of public outrage, right? The actual visuals of children in cages, right, sleeping with foiled blankets, separated from their parents, the legacy of which still goes on. Again, that was something I wish I would have heard when we were debating whether or not we should have an electoral justice strategy. We're not thinking about those kids, in addition to everybody that we need to think about. And again, this isn't about finger pointing. It's like what happens when we become singularly focused, rather than having just a multi-pronged approach that thinks about years in advance. Anyway, so we had these babies, and you saw Trump sort of shift on that. I believe that they're going to make sure that we never see these people ever again, right? Like that was a learning moment for them. Anyway, this vast deportation operation would require so much space. Well, here's the thing. Stephen Miller has now spoken out on that and said that military funds would be used to create, quote, vast holding facilities that would function as staging centers. So this is where people would be, immigrants would be, as their cases were being, progressed, and as they were waited to be flown to other countries. That's a too soft way of saying that, and that comes from the New York Times. Got this source from the New York Times and the Guardian. Anyway, so this is nuts. And so, okay, then you're like, okay, well, they're thinking about building these facilities, but then they don't have the manpower. But now they're saying that part of their plan is to bolster the ranks of ICE officers with law enforcement officials who would be temporarily assigned, and state, National Guardsmen, and federal troops that would be activated to enforce the law on domestic soil under the Insurrection Act. Right? They're also going to use due process-free expulsions known as expedited removal. Right? So, I mean, this is wild. That's currently what's used, with recent arrivals at the border, right? So people living across the interior of the country who cannot prove that they have been in the United States for more than 2 years are going to be almost immediately kicked out. And that might seem like an easy, reasonable thing, but for anybody who didn't grow up with money, which is most people I've met, or with, who moved around a lot, or who didn't have parents that were kind of stable or whatever, you got a sense of how difficult paper trails could be if you had to move around a lot. And, it can be really hard when the onus is on you to prove these things, especially for a system that's tilted against you. I know I've had to sort of go through some of this myself. I know how extraordinarily difficult it is, and it will be. And, just know what you're reading, right? It's meant to articulate a kind of fairness, like there's a level of due process that's happening, but what's on paper isn't necessarily what the experience is going to be, and it is going to be the wild, wild west. And perhaps the most heinous out of all of this is that the team plans to stop issuing citizen-affirming documents, that's passports and that's social security cards, for any infants born on domestic soil to undocumented migrant parents, right? So they want to end what they're calling birthright citizenship. This breaks my heart. Obviously, all of it does. It's so against the human spirit. Nobody wants to leave their home. I'm not talking about traveling people or foodies or whatever. I mean, when you are absolutely forced to leave your homes because of untenable living conditions, because of starvation, because of violence against your persons, against everything, just a violent world that you live in, and you flee in hope of a better life. And the extraordinary sacrifice, and I know that there's been a massive dehumanization campaign against immigrants and migrants, and the sacrifices that they make, the confronting of death on these journeys, just so that their children could possibly have a better life than they did. To remove that, that's a level of cruel that I've not really seen, before. So, and speaking of which, is a good time to remind us, about what is happening in Gaza and why we need to be paying attention and we can't look away, right? So we have talked extensively on this show, and from the experts, they have said over and over again, humanitarian aid is the only thing that's going to keep Gazans alive. And Israel has done everything it can to ensure that that aid does not reach those people, that the aid does not get to Gaza. And they've, blown up trucks, redirected routes, like everything that you can imagine. They've blocked aid to the point where Biden had to sort of say something. Not that he's like the world's greatest enforcer, but I mean, that's how egregious it was that they're lockstep for the most part. And then it was like, no, actually, I'm going to have to flex my very, very negative zero biceps on this. They said it. They said that they're going to let it in. They're not really doing it. But now we have a very urgent issue. And this is that food aid trucks for Gaza are being violently looted. This is a report from the UN, right? So it's been happening, not on a major scale, but this weekend was perhaps the worst example of it. 109 food aid trucks, right? For Gaza, it was a convoy, was looted. This is according to the UN. And as we know, like the UNRWA, we've talked about them before. This is and their Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, or Philippe, I don't know. It's one of those, but Lazzarini, he did not identify the perpetrators, but he said that there's a total breakdown of civil order, right, in Gaza, and that become an impossible environment to operate in. Now, let me go further, right? This is important. Two things are really, really crucial to this moment, right? So Saturday's looting was first reported by Reuters, right? That's come on, you're not going to find a more verified news agency than that. So they were informed, right, by a UNRWA official in Gaza that the convoy was instructed by Israeli authorities to, quote, depart at short notice via an unfamiliar route. That is very suspicious. That's incredibly suspicious. Now, this isn't a moment, like why at the very last minute would they be instructed to take an unfamiliar route? We know that there is a dedicated investment by Israel to ensure that Gazans don't survive, that medical aid, humanitarian aid, food aid, that these things don't make it there. We don't need to dabble in conspiracies. We just need to actually acknowledge precedent. That's been the precedent here. But here's the thing. So the other piece, so that's one, that's very important. The other side of that is last week, a group of 29 non-governmental organizations said in a report that the looting of aid convoys was, quote, a consequence of Israel's targeting of the remaining police forces in Gaza, right? So I want you to think about what that means. That means that Israel has been doing everything that they can to fracture or obliterate, abuse or brutalize the presence of the remaining police forces in Gaza, right? So they don't want order in Gaza. And this is not a moment where I'm like suddenly pro-cop. That's not the point, right? You have to think about how this kind of regime, why they would be invested in that. The removal of any kind of order or structure, it does something to people, right? And then make them starve. And then make them be in pain. After already witnessing the most horrid, brutal things you can imagine, we're at a point where a lowball number is 44,000 Gazans near Dam have been murdered, Palestinians, Gazans in particular, right? So there's a reason why they're going to do that. They're going to target the remaining police forces in Gaza. Then add the fact that there's scarcity of essential goods. So now we're back into the report, right? Scarcity of essential goods, lack of routes, and closure of most crossing points, and the subsequent desperation of the population amid these dire conditions. So what that means, right? What that means is that there have been incidents and cases where Gazans and Palestinians, specifically, have had to forcibly try to access these trucks. I want you to think about Hurricane Katrina for a second and how quickly news media talked about black people being looters. It's a very racially charged term, right? when there's no empathy, there's no sympathy in traditional news media when it comes to people of color, poor people, right? People in the South, Black folks, when it comes to trying to access the basic necessities for survival, you are a looter. And if you dare touch property, or dare touch, corporations' belongings, you are a violent criminal. You're a looter. That's where this racially charged language comes from. And this well-meaning guy, we're having this sort of back and forth over the weekend, and he brought this up as a way to sort of suggest the kind of lawlessness amongst Arabs. And it didn't take me very long to make that silly, right? That's like, I could literally just talk about Israel, and I'm not going to waste time sort of examining that sort of ludicrous position, but what he'd been trained to believe. But I asked him if he understood how colonialism worked, right? And what it means to sort of be forced into indignity, into human indignity, and how the human spirit is actually too resilient for that. We have a very strong instinct for survival, especially when you love your people, or you love living, or you love your land, right? Which is a very indigenous thing, right? To love the land. That's why so many Palestinians have not only been murdered, but willing to die because they genuinely love the land as only caretakers of the land can, right? And I've seen this. I've seen it when I was doing my little work in Six Nations territory, down in Canada. And when I was in Standing Rock, South Dakota and North Dakota, right? Just traveling that whole area, helping with the protests, being a part of this wonderful movement time. And I saw something I'd never really seen before, this like unbelievable relationship to land. It was really magnificent. And, what's happening now is just what colonialism does. And then we blame, rather than look at the power structures. We're like, well, look how they're acting. Look what they're doing. These are not, they can't self-govern. It was the justification for enslavement, right? It's the justification for anything. They just have to move the needle of whatever it is, right? They can't be trusted. They're lawless. And it's like, no, you created conditions of lawlessness and made people suffer and starve and brutalize them on every possible conceivable level. And anyone who has, I'm like, if you're coming in with judgment, then you have never been hungry in your life. You've never seen, and the truth is, we have never seen what they've seen. It's unbelievable that we're here. And I guess this is a good moment actually to sort of move into, because we're seeing the actualization of this plan take shape with Trump. He's not really taken a position or spoken openly about his plans for Palestine or Gaza beyond the fact that it's great real estate property, which is terrifying. But I'm going to be very clear about something, right? In this next sort of these steps, right? Because we're going to use 1/3 of this time together to just sort of unpack and unravel some of the stuff. I am not interested in examining or talking about white guys and what white guys, like, we're so past that. Like, and I think that's part of why we're here. It's these, these men and these white guys. It's like, no, actually, it's not. It's far more complicated than that. It's be easy to say Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro are exactly the same. They're not actually, but have we seen Joe Rogan sort of shift more to the right in the past couple of years? Yeah. And that requires some examination, but I don't think Joe Rogan would ever identify as right wing. He doesn't actually identify with a political affiliation. Our models are old. So I'm actually going to take them off the tape. This idea of resenting these guys, or just take them off the table, because they're not actually why we lost. And that's what I think we're not really getting. Like, we think about, power structure, status quo, the elite, and we're using a very dated model. Yesterday we touched upon how it's time to let go of this concept of deplatforming, right? The one thing the right has done very well is establish their own media ecosystem. That and there's a difference, I think, between, yes, deplatforming and canceling, right? But for the sake of this argument, and the fact that they do overlap, I'm going to live in that sort of space of overlap, right? Because the strategies that worked before don't work now. And also, we should probably interrogate them, you know, and what it means. Like, I think it was Destiny, the guy who's currently going at it with Hassan, and they're supposed to be part of the same leftist ecosystem, which is a whole thing, right? They're both two streamers. One would probably identify more as like a liberal, and then there's Hassan, and they're sort of, there's a whole thing going on. We're not going to get into it, but I did hear Destiny sort of say, his name's Steve, that he was totally right. Everything is a conspiracy right now. It doesn't really matter what it's about. Everything is, there's no facts, and it's just whatever you want to believe, you could just believe it. But that, if left to his own device, he would just deplatform everybody. Just, Candace Owens and this guy and this guy, and just named a bunch of people. And I'm like, no, that's actually not the strategy. Like, I understand like the emotion, but like, that's part of how we got here. If we can't figure out that it's not about making other people's voices smaller, right? It's about making ours bigger and creating a compelling enough case that people want to listen to. And you can't do that if anytime people have a question or anytime people have a challenge, that we fall to pieces. And I've been thinking about this, and I did read this article today that's about a book, and I haven't read the book yet, but I'm about to read the book. It's like, I got to get my book money up. You know what I mean? Got to get my book money up. But it's, We Have Never Been Woke, and it's by Musa Al-Gharbi. But essentially this is a 41-year-old sociologist at Stony Brook University who talks about his own experience of a political disillusionment when he moved from Arizona to New York. But, right, this is some of his, musings, right? Musa, this is an article in The Atlantic, Musa sees the re-election of Donald Trump as a reflection of America's resentment towards elites and the rapid shift in discourse and norms around identity issues that he refers to as the Great Awakening, right? So in his interview with this journalist, to understand, this is a quote from the article, to understand what's happening in America, to American politics, he told me, we shouldn't look to the particulars of the election, quote, say the attributes of Harris, how she ran her campaign, inflation worries, and so on, but rather to this broader backlash. All of the signs were there for elites to see if only they'd bothered to look. And this thing has been bothering me, right? It's been like really sitting with me. Because when we think, like with the left, we say elites, right? And then that's usually like, you think, oh, white guys, they're the elites, right? But what if they're not, right? Like if we're actually talking about the left, let's just take them off the table, right? So take them off the table too. Because it's just too, it's too simple. It's just too goddamn simple now. I'm starting to get really irritated by it. Who ran the anti-Chappelle campaign? Remember that? I had a problem with that from the beginning, right? And see this as a thought experiment. Because right now, you've got the Pod Save America bros, and they're driving me nuts because they're implying that, special interest groups like not-for-profits are somehow the equivalent of special interest groups like super PACs. And it's like, no, actually the PAC that has influenced the Democratic Party the most prior to October 7th, 2023 was APAC. Like, just one of, you know what I mean? Like in terms of a special interest group, a special interest super PAC, it was fucking APAC. And to equate these two things and to suggest that trans people or black people had something to do with it, it's mind-boggling. So they're kind of positioning it like that. AOC rightfully came out and was just like, this is the one that you guys really ought to be looking at. And, what the F? And, then you have these other podcast bros that are kind of fighting, and this idea that we just need our own sort of leftist ecosystem. And it's like, no, shit's actually way more complicated than that. And the right funds their own media. They're very good at that. And that you can point to and say, okay, yeah. But it's also because they understand the need to, right? That they're like, oh, we're not being represented the way that we want in mainstream media, even though to us it was like, well, you were represented more than most folks. But it wasn't what they wanted. So they built their own shit and then they fund them. The Daily Wire is a great example of that. We don't have that on the left, and the Democratic establishment definitely isn't, because what they're afraid of, and I read this article today about it in, what is it called? Aftermath.site, right? And it's really, I can't say, that I'm not pulling data from that, but they had a point of view that essentially was just like from a trans streamer who was basically like, the Democrats are never gonna. I just like raised, you can't see this on the podcast side, but I just like raised my arms up and saw how much hair I had under my pits, and it freaked me out. So I'm putting them back down. That was very aggressive to me. It's time for a grooming session. Anyway, our folks aren't getting along, and this trans streamer was basically like, the Democrats are just never going to fund that because it opens up too much stuff, right? Like, look what happened around the Bernie Sanders campaign, because we are fundamentally anti-establishment, and the establishment Dems can't be anti-establishment because that's who their stakeholders are now. And until that changes, we're in a bind. And I think what we all can sort of agree on across the sort of liberal to left punditry and everything else, which I'm now sort of dipping my toe in and trying, with the goal of sort of growing at scale, is that running on a populist economic platform is not only necessary, but it works, right? But it works. And I'll give you an example of that as we round out. So just want to put a pin in that. You will get an example of that in Wisconsin before I, wrap this up. But I wanted to name, like, what happens when we take everything off the table? Like I've been talking about the fact that we have been dealing with a level of obsessiveness, like identity obsessiveness on the left. And I can't stand identitarianism, is what I call what the right reinterpreted as identity politics. Black people came up with this great term to be like, this is what's happening in America. Black scholars, academics said identity politics. The right took it, reformatted it into the identity politics that we know, and then sent it out to liberals. And liberals were like, oh my God, it's identity politics. I can't believe we're still here talking about this. The left side of the media, core that's, more fragmented or whatever, it does know this. Of course, the Pod Save America guys and the Ezra Kleins are absolutely in fucking denial. It's unbelievable how they're still talking about this. Like, I can't wrap my mind around it. I'm like, is this what happens when you do too well for too long? But the elites that I'm interested in discussing, and it's a reframe, right? What do we consider elitist? Like white, college educated, right? Those are the kind of the two big ones. I mean, we love to throw in male, but I'm not, like, I don't care about, like, I just don't care about that right now. Because it's too easy. But on our side, if we're only looking at the left, I've been thinking about the two areas that I've been the most frustrated in, which has been sort of, our inability to, like, this idea, they're coming for me. And it's largely been from Jewish folks, right? And this is anecdotal, right? This is not data. Let's be really clear. I don't want to have to say this every time. Let's be really fucking clear. Anti-Semitism is something I'm deeply invested in fighting against. It has everything to do with anti-Black racism, and AIPAC and other special interest groups like it and the ADL are not even close to accurate reflections of what Jewish people experience or what Jewish people believe. To substantiate that, the two demographics that voted most for Democrats, Black women and Jewish women. So we're good. But right, being hated is a very scary thing. And this country will just totally do whatever it needs to do anytime that there are, certain kinds of aggrieved white folks, or, when the stars align and everything else, and, whatever, or scared white folks. It's easier to change policies and whatever. That's why we were able to see, legislation passed with Congress and everything else, where you have a term like Zionism that's banned and whatever. But I guess what I want to say is, like, when that whole Dave Chappelle thing happened, I was like, we're not in charge of the discourse. And when I say we, I mean I like me, like some like people who look like me or sound like me. Like black folks were like, what are you doing when like like our sort of our side went after Dave Chappelle? Like to me, you want to know what was most offensive to me about Dave Chappelle's jokes? It wasn't the jokes at all. It was that we didn't say them first. That's it. Like those were our jokes to say. I'm a comedian. I get on stage. I be talking my shit, but I'm not at the level that he's at. But there was this like he named things that we didn't name. And, of course, like I think he got in his feelings a little bit and sort of went off. But I'm talking about that very first special where it ended up being this whole cancel Dave Chappelle thing and deplatform Dave Chappelle. And obviously it backfired in the same way that the whole Jordan Peterson canceling Jordan Peterson backfired. When you create a force against somebody or something, a counterforce will rise to meet you. And then boom, the person in the middle, I'm making a steeple with my hands, rises up and a man becomes a mountain, right? Like we have literally made people famous. And it's largely because elitist institutions and populations on the left are guiding our language. GLAAD is one of them. I talked the other day about how like non-binary, what did I say? Non-binary, no nipple having, college educated. Yeah, like they're coming for us or, these are my pronouns types. And they are influencing and shaping our discourse in a way that actually comes from elitism. And that is not a reflection of the left. The vast majority of people that I knew from the left who were people of color, were just like, this whole Dave Chappelle thing is a waste of time. We're like, we are not the ones who are saying this is, just I shouldn't have to explain anything, and the questions are trying. Like, no, they're. And I know I go a little bit further than most people with the pronouns, which is like I couldn't give a fuck about what pronouns people use for me because it's not about you understanding me, right? I'm the service worker. It's about me understanding you. And the people who love me and know me, they'll use whatever pronouns like I'm feeling. But look at me. I can't even tell what I am half the time. I was like, some of us are just too cute for two genders. I don't know what to tell you. But, I know I'm sort of making a plug here. And again, this is a thought experiment. But I do think that we have to review our dated understandings of the terms elitism. Even when we say the rich, right? The rich. And you might be thinking a millionaire or something or an actor. I don't give a fuck about 15, 20, 30, $50 million. I couldn't give a goddamn. I am talking about the oligarchy right now. Like that's how disparate these terms have become. Like the terms, I don't know if they are keeping up to date with the reality. And I want us to interrogate this notion of elitism. Of course, we're seeing it on the left with the pod guys and, the Ezra Kleins and everything else. And that doesn't mean that they are wrong or that they should be dismissed. And I'm not saying that about our folks either, right? But I don't think we're understanding how much our terminology is dated. And this is just, again, me examining the fight tape. And I feel very, very good about where we're headed, which I know might sound like a little nuts because things are not great at the moment. And we've got a hell of a fight ahead of us, but I really genuinely believe in our abilities to. But I think we've got to grow up a little bit and start naming things for what they are. And maybe start to think about what 21st century models of like organizing our language looks like, because we have serious rhetorical issues. And the Democratic Party is not going to come and save us. But we as I've mentioned before, we can't even mention, I had a total brain fart. I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm thirsty. And then I had a total brain fart. So I'm just going to have a bit of water. Sorry about that, y'all. Yum, that was good. But there are certain things that we can't even, say without inciting this whole debate about this, that, and the other. And yes, there are absolutely conditions and things that we need to be worried about, but nobody's like, we're in California, you're in New York, you're college educated, you came from this, that, and the other, and I think you can let your imagination run wild about danger, but it does suggest that you haven't really known danger in a way where you have had to grow accustomed to it. Like to be a you know, to be a young black person, for example, like I'll speak from my personal experience, a child, right? Is to understand that there's not your innocence. Like you have to grapple with powerlessness at a very early age that does an unbelievable amount of psychological damage to you, right? If you aren't receiving a kind of love and care with any level of consistency. I'd say that's true about poor people, that's true about disabled people, this and that and the other. You've had to grapple with, and it causes this rage and a fear, and you learn how to right size that rage and that fear every day that you are alive, right? And I know this might shock a lot of us, but men experience that too. Like, this is the thing. I think our terms are dated, and I think how we understand elitism has to change, because there's been a lot of accumulated wealth in the last, decade or so, that I don't know that we even have the wherewithal to acknowledge, but I do know that we're headed in the right place. And I just want to round us out really quickly with where the strategy that we all can agree on. And I'm bringing this up to say that, see, there's not as much discord and infighting as one might believe, that, this economic populism policy platform like Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, that's Senator Tammy Baldwin, ran on that, right? So was able to squeak out a win by less than 1 percentage point in a state famous for let's just put it this way. Kamala Harris lost Wisconsin, but she won there. And that was that tens of thousands of Wisconsinites voted. This is the thing that's fascinating. Tens of thousands of Wisconsinites, is that how you say it, voted for Baldwin, right? So Senator Tammy Baldwin, and for Donald Trump. That's unbelievable. That means Baldwin performed better than Harris in 65 of Wisconsin's 72 counties, right? And why? How was she able to do that? She focused on the deliverables, but this is what she said, specifically, by way of example, and small and medium-sized dairy farms struggle a lot. So my Dairy Innovation Act in the 2018 Farm Bill was a direct result of hearing about those challenges, but also the opportunities to grow their business, to profit from their businesses. Right. So she goes, I was endorsed by the Wisconsin Farm Bureau, the first statewide Democrat in about 20 years. So the folks who had observed my work may well be my ticket splitters. That's how she sees it. Now, if we're listening to the podcast bros, right, the podcast bros will say, well, she didn't run on identity politics then, but here's the thing. She did not shy away from her beliefs, right? She talked openly and broadly and all the time about being a lead author of the Women's Health Protection Act, right? Which would restore Roe nationwide. And she talked at depth of her support of the Affordable Care Act. These are things that people use to say, well, it would have made her divisive, and it would have made her this and that, and all this shit. Now, here's my pushback to what and again, I'm not saying this literally because I'm in my thought experiment era, but what would it look like? Right, if trans folks, instead of trying the elitist narrative, the folks who are shaping the rhetoric, the trans narrative rhetoric, which are largely, I'll tell you who they're not. They're not trans women of color, and they're not black trans women. They're not the people who are being directly impacted by the worst conditions in our society before, and they're not the ones who are going to be most directly impacted after. Which is why I'm like, oh. Like I'm saying this in a joke, and I know I got to round us out because I'm yapping way too much, but I honestly think that academia was one of the worst fucking things to happen to the queer community. Like, where's our art? Where's our fucking potlucks? Like I understand why. Like, we were being shitted on and treated like garbage, and we weren't in the world, and we weren't being let in, and we got into academia. But that shit can make you extremely nihilistic and very self-obsessed. And sometimes I'm talking to us, and I'm just like, we get it so abstract. There's nowhere to go. It's annoying and it's boring. And every person that the smartest people I know, they're extremely nihilist. And I understand it. And I do think, nation states are going to run their course. That's what they do. But what we do while we're here still fucking matters. Right? It matters a lot. So, but instead of running on this cancel Dave Chappelle or making a whole online narrative about pronouns, what would it have looked like if we, and this is a thought experiment, I am not suggesting this, but what would it have, because I haven't sat with it enough, but what would it have looked like if we had focused all of our time and energy, right, on abortion and protecting it, or, you know, small businesses, or, yeah, just about anything. I'm just curious. What would it have looked like? Because look at what our cultural acumen was able to accomplish. It's just that it really benefited the right. And I think in part because of that elitism, that's what it teaches you. It's about me and how I feel and what I need. I am not being seen the way I want to be seen. Me, right? But that's not really what this is about. Like, that's not how you build power. And I am not judging the why of it. Right? It's very hurtful to be in the world and not to be seen the way that you want to be seen. But I think the strongest case for the elitism is that you're entitled to it. I think that's the difference. That you believe, and it was very much in the trans narrative that's entitled. And when women were just like, oh, hey, yeah, you're talking about like, you know, body autonomy, me too, you know, and I have pregnancies and I have this, and we were like, shut up, bitch. Like, that's what trans people said to them. We literally sidelined women. That's elitism. Sorry. That's what that is. That does not mean that trans people at large are an elitist population. No. But are we adopting elitist rhetoric? Are we taking on that energy? And has a lot of that been informed by academia? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And I think it's time for us to, just get rid of what doesn't serve us as a whole. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Okay. This is going on too long. Why don't we hit the VMs for that question of the day?
Hey, this is Zoe calling from LA. I wanted to ask, who is the cutest small dog you've ever encountered, and what about them made them the cutest?
That's so funny. I kind of know where this question's coming from. Obviously, the immediate answer is Purnell, who is the little Chihuahua min pin that I found on the street, and that I named him Purnell, and then I ran a full campaign trying to get KR to adopt him, because there was nothing funnier to me than hearing a white Jew that grew up in the state of New York yell, Purnell, across a park. The thought of that's a black ass name. It was hilarious to me. And also he had these like amazing little forearms. So he just looked like the boxer Purnell Sweet Pea Whitaker. So Purnell's got lots of different names. He's adorable. Not like my Sula, my little Sula. Maybe Sula should take a trip to Saudi Arabia. But Purnell, Purnelli Furtado, Penelope, he's got tons of names. He's a wonderful little boy, and a little shit, just like all the best little boys are. So anyway, with that, it sounds like it's about time to wrap. I'm sorry I've been yapping. It's like I got to figure out how to do the news and this fight tape, but thank you so much for being in this with me. With that, just want to say thank you so much for listening to JFK today. You know, it means the world to me. The show really is a labor of love. New episodes drop 4 times a week. We're available everywhere podcasts are. Don't forget to drop your voice note questions, to JFK Today Show at gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Shout out to Carolyn, KR, and shout out to you, the listeners that make this all possible.